at the heart of it all for me is I just think that young people have a fundamental right to know and to understand what is happening in their bodies at the time of their first period, and to feel empowered and knowledgeable and positive about what is happening, because it's a rite of passage, right? Like it's leaving childhood behind and entering adulthood, and it's something that deserves to be celebrated and acknowledged. But they also deserve and have the right to some really high quality education and experiences around that time as well.
Welcome to the Wildflow podcast with me, Charlotte Puanto, certified cycle and feminine embodiment coach and shamanic womb guide. In this podcast, I'll share my wisdom and conversations with powerful change makers, thought leaders and embodied teachers to invite you to live cyclically in flow with your menstrual cycle instead of fearing it, to heal menstrual shame and normalize womb wisdom and period positivity, and to step into your sovereign magnetic power to create and embody the change you desire to see in your world. Settle in to unleash your wild flow. Today's guest, Beth Moxon, is a cyclical living guide in East Sussex in England. Beth is a qualified secondary school teacher and has taught in London for many years. She now trains teachers and works with different secondary schools across Kent in England. Beth is also a certified cycle coach and a certified First Moon Circle facilitator, and she has extensive experience holding space for young people and adults. She's highly skilled and knowledgeable and very passionate about all things menstruality related, and she loves sharing her passion and knowledge through running local First Moon Circles. She also has big plans to get into schools. She has 2 little daughters who keep her busy during the times when she's not thinking about periods. And I'm so excited to have Beth on Wildflow because she's somebody who I connected with back in cycle coach training and obviously through the First Moon Facilitator training too. And she has such a spark and a passion and a fire for being able to not only reclaim this for ourselves, but to look at our own experiences of being a tween or a teen and having periods and all those memories that we have and have actually forgotten, and how much we can really connect with each other when we remember all the ways that we had to hide or manage our periods. And Beth is so passionate about changing up this experience for school children so that they can be empowered, so that they have access to quality education. And she wants to, through her role as a teacher trainer, but mostly as a First Moon Circle facilitator in her community, wants to really support the changing narrative around periods for children. In this conversation, me and Beth have a conversation about what it's like to show up on her day 2 and my early premenstrual phase, but my evening as well, and how Beth just shares really beautifully throughout the podcast of how real that is for her to look after herself, to be on a podcast on the day 2 of her cycle, of her bleed. We talk about the language that we have and how important language is around changing attitudes to anything, but especially menstruation. We talk about the memories that we have of being school children and having periods and what that's like. And I asked Beth whether it's changed, whether it's different now. We talk about some of the challenges that teachers are experiencing about actually improving their menstrual education in schools, and talking about what Beth is doing about that. So there's wisdom in there as well for anyone in the education field. And we really just talk about our hopes, our visions for how we can do our bit, but how that can ripple out to create this changed period positive world. And I just loved connecting with Beth, and I know that you're going to love her too. And I encourage you to listen in and to go and find her over on TikTok if you're on there, especially because she's really making big headway in changing up the conversation, opening conversations about positive menstruation. wherever you are when you're listening to this, I hope that you connect with your own memories, your own experience of growing up, and think about how you can contribute to changing this attitude that we have around the world towards periods. Happy listening. Welcome, Beth, to Wild Flow. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. And I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited that you're here. I know that we're going to have a really awesome conversation today. I've been looking forward to this one. And so I would just love to begin by asking you to share with us whereabouts in your cycle, if you have one, you are, and how that feels for you today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on cycle day 2. So I started bleeding yesterday and it feels really good. I don't know about you, but I just always have this real relief when I start to bleed. I think more physically, I think I feel it than anything else, because I can be so bloated the couple of days leading up to bleeding, and everything just feels a bit sluggish and uncomfortable. So when it actually starts, it always feels like a real relief to me. So yeah, and I'm enjoying, taking some rest and setting some clear boundaries about what I will and won't do over the next few days, and how I'll sort of parent and manage my work diary and things like that. So yeah, I'm feeling good.
Love that. Love that it's a relief for you, that it feels really good and that you really enjoy it. And I can relate to the bloated feeling, and then that release. I get like that. I get this soreness in my sacrum about 24 hours or so before I start bleeding. And it's very specific. And I think, oh, and then I start bleeding. And I'm always really pleased because my cycles are still quite irregular. And so I have this like, when are you coming? Like, I thought you were coming. And, sometimes it takes a bit longer than other times. So whenever my blood comes, I'm always like, yes.
Yeah.
It just feels nice.
And it's lovely you have that little warning sign. And I think, when we yeah, definitely. I feel it more at the front, like in the kind of womb space, but there's a very specific feeling that I get. And sometimes it rarely happens now, but as I was sort of learning to adopt menstrual cycle awareness and incorporate it into my life, sometimes I'd be a bit like, oh, what's that feeling? Like, have I eaten something, or, why do I feel like that? And then I'd be like, yeah, no, that's the pre 24-hour, period of leading up to before I started to bleed.
Fascinating. It's so interesting, isn't it? How we can pay more attention and start to piece the pieces of the puzzle together, and it suddenly all falls into place, and it's like, oh, I get it. Feels very nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the real kind of challenges that I get quite often is like, oh, it's all well and good doing this menstrual cycle awareness malarkey, but I've got 2 kids and a full-time job and blah blah blah, and I can't just say no to things or stop my life for the period of bleeding. And I really enjoy that challenge, because I really enjoy kind of having those conversations where I say to people, that's not what I see as the purpose of menstrual cycle awareness. I don't see it as saying to people, like, don't do anything for 7 days of every month. We can't do that, right? Like, we have commitments and responsibilities and lives to lead. But I think just being armed, like, knowledge is power, and being armed with the knowledge that, perhaps if you've got a big work thing coming up and you're going to be on day 2 or 3, knowing what that might look and feel like for you, and then knowing how you could perhaps plan or adapt to make that work for you if it can't be moved, I think is only a beneficial, positive thing. And that always seems to resonate. People are like, I see. Okay, so I slightly have missed the point of what it was all about. I don't know if you find that at all.
Oh, entirely. I feel like that to me has been the thing that I've struggled with the most, because it's not realistic to be like, this is when you do nothing.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, I think we do have a cultural and collective issue with rest, as particularly women. You know, it's, you can't be lazy, you can't be unproductive, you've got to kind of earn your keep and do your, you know, it's like this old kind of paradigm. And I think that we just feel like we have to be on all the time. That's obviously collectively and, you know, generalizing. But I also think that there's a balance. Like, life is not, you know, where we are operating in a patriarchy still, and we can't pretend we're not. And we still, not only that, we, you know, we do, if you do have children, they don't just go, oh, sure, mum, I'll go sort myself out, when they're, you know, especially if they're little, you know, for like all that time. You know, and if you're working, you can't just say, I'm not going to do any work, full stop. You know, some companies are starting to have menstrual leave policies, but it doesn't cover the whole period. That's for sure. It's impossible to do. So it's okay. You know, what are you going to do to support yourself through those commitments that you've got? Like, what can you let go of where it's not an essential thing and it's like, oh, that can wait, that's easy. But the things that you can't, it's like, well, you know, you're still here doing this podcast, Beth, so I would love to ask you, what does supporting yourself to be here on this podcast on your day 2 look like? What are you doing around this to support yourself?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I know I'm not particularly good at, sort of on days 1 and 2 of my period, is articulating very well. So, you know, this is it's my ability to kind of gather my thoughts and articulate them in a way that I find I can do so much better during my inner summer or my inner spring. I really, really noticed that. So for me this morning, I just blocked a little bit of time before the call to do a little bit of stretching and just kind of calm myself a little bit and just think about, you know, the kinds of questions that you might ask or the things that we might talk about, and just like gather my thoughts a little bit. Whereas if I was doing this in my inner summer, I probably wouldn't have done that. I probably wouldn't have given it a thought until we got on the call, because I just have that sort of confidence that, you know, we were going to have a great chat and I would articulate myself and all would be fine. But that, I don't have that at this time. You know, there's a little bit of inner critic, and there's definitely, a slight disconnect between what's going on in my brain. It's almost like a delay. It's like, well, I know exactly what I want to say, but my mouth doesn't quite make the words. I did doing that this morning, and having that flexibility to be able to do that with my work diary today is fantastic. So that's the main thing that I've done.
Thank you so much for just being completely real and sharing that with us, because I appreciate that so much, and I bet people listening do as well. It's this realness that we just need more and more of, and I think everyone, you know, who listens to this podcast appreciates the realness, but it is real. And I so know that feeling of when your mouth won't move and speak what you're trying to say. And I'm on day 21 myself now. And
okay.
I have, and it's nighttime for me. I'm in Australia and it's late morning, nearly lunchtime for you, right? In the UK. So I'm at that point of the day where I fell asleep putting my kid to bed earlier on, and then woke up with a start and went, oh my God, I'm doing a podcast with Beth. And I feel like my mouth is slowing down as well. And I'm having that sort of disconnect. And that's not necessarily my cycle, but it's the day cycle that's really kicking in. So I'm not opposed to having these conversations at night. I really enjoy the nighttime and the quiet time, but I'm a different me compared to how I am at 10 a.m., for example. And, you know, that's me bringing, the real part of who I am right now as well, like that sleepy kind of, winding down, not sleepy, just winding down, slower paced, definitely feeling like I've moved into like an early autumn kind of energy. That is where I feel like I am in my cycle. And I don't feel, you know, there's definitely a difference for me between early premenstrual and late premenstrual. Like, it's, you know, it's a whole thing. So I definitely feel like I'm in that early premenstrual where I still have decent energy, and I dragged my kids around today doing all the things we had to do, and it was fine. I had the energy for it. And I still have, a level of confidence that critic hasn't arrived yet. She'll be here. She'll be here in time, but she's not quite here yet. So yeah, I love hearing, we are, in different parts of our cycle, there's differences, but there's similarities, and there's the time of day and all those things and how it's affecting us. But I just love to frame conversations in that way.
Yeah.
So thank you.
I can you imagine a boardroom in a company where like the weekly meeting starts with a cycle check-in for those that bleed? I mean, can you imagine the power in that? Like, I'm on day one, so don't expect the most from me today, and that's okay because I'm on day 14, so I'll take over and present that bit. It just, how powerful would that be?
So powerful, so accepting and liberating and healing. And as well, it's interesting. So, the people who don't have a menstrual cycle, they'd be with the moon. So, it'd be like, oh, I'm with the moon, so the moon is here, and how am I feeling in relation to where the moon is? Like, is that influencing me? And everyone, even the men, could be having this check-in of just even as just a mirror, like a point inwards, a way just to check in, and instead of going, how are you? Yeah, fine. Yeah, good. How are you? Yeah, fine. Like a deeper level of connection to how you actually are, I think it's just humanizing, isn't it, as well, in places like boardrooms and businesses where it's just kind of mask all of that away.
Exactly. And just really kind of reinforcing this notion that we're all cyclic. We might be on slightly different cycles, and whether we bleed or not, like it's we are all cyclic human beings. And I think it just perpetuates this idea that we can feel differently and act differently and be different on different days of our cycle, and that's completely okay. We don't have to be kind of, like you say, that sort of masked corporate self every day.
The star performer every day. It's just not possible. Oh, I know.
Yeah.
So Beth, we could go on in so many different directions with this conversation, but I would love to ask you to just share with us what you're weaving together in your work, in your world, and just, in your own words, how you came to be here, like what's brought you to be doing what you're doing today.
Okay. So it's my friend Laura who brought me to where I am today, really by chance, because she took me to go to this conference in London. Must have been about 6 years ago now. I'd had my eldest, Evie, she's 6, and I think she was about a year old. So it was 5 years ago. And she phoned me up and said, do you want to come to this sort of women's conference? There's inspirational speakers throughout the day. It'd be a really nice, girly day out. And I said, oh, go on then, that sounds lovely. So we met up and we went into this event, and I couldn't tell you who else was speaking that day, but the person who really like blew my mind and was the starting point for all of this was I heard Claire Baker speak, and she did this fabulous hour on menstrual cycle awareness, and she showed us that lovely diagram that goes through the seasons. And I mean, I just, my jaw dropped. I was just like, how have I not known this? I've been having a period since I was 11 years old, and I would have been 31 at the time of hearing this, because it just resonated. It explained so much, and it just really, really resonated with me. So I went away from that talk and was like, right, just devoured every book, every podcast, everything that I could possibly find on menstrual cycle awareness. And I started cycle tracking, and I am very lucky that I've always had a very regular cycle, and I could very quickly spot patterns and links, and soon I was really finding that it was helping me in lots of different areas of my life. It was helping me to sort of understand how I parent, and how I managed my social diary and how I was at work. And at the time I was a head of department. I'm a trained secondary teacher, and I was a head of department in a secondary school in London. So I had a really busy job, and it was helping me to manage that. So it was incredible. And I was like, everyone needs to know about this. as I think so many of us who are involved in this work feel that real passion, right, to connect and to share. So from that, I pondered, where do I want to take this? What do I want to do with this? And I think for me, because I'm not in the classroom at the moment, so I currently train teachers, and I miss that. It's the one thing I miss, is that connection to young people and being in the classroom and being with them. So I was like, I really want to use this knowledge and use this work with young people at the time of menarche. And I think I used to see, I used to have kids who would come to me, and I had a few who had started their period in school and didn't know what was happening. I had lots who would come to try and find period products, and and I kind of could see that the period education, whilst I think schools do their absolute best and do what they need to do to prepare young people, it's just not. It's not as amazing as it could be, I think, when you discover menstrual cycle awareness and you realise how much more there is out there to know. So I did cycle coach. I did Claire Baker's cycle coach last year, which I loved, and that was really broad. The training is amazing, and I was thinking, how am I going to go into this? Is it menarche and young people? Is there something here about menopause and perimenopause? Kind of took a while to figure out exactly how I was going to position myself and what I wanted to do with it all. But yeah, it ended up being what I thought it would be from the start, which was working with young people. And so then, as you know, I signed up to do your fabulous training to become an accredited First Moon Circle facilitator, which I've just finished. And that's been, just the most amazing 6 months. That's been absolutely incredible. The quality of the training and the community and the group that we've formed has been really special. And 2 weeks ago, I did my very first Moon Circle. So that's where I'm at the moment. I'm trying to build a following and a community and raise awareness, whilst also, running First Moon Circles in the community.
Incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's so helpful to hear what your journey and the progression has been, and what that first learning was for you, and the veil lifting and that, oh my God. And it's so true. I think so many people who I speak to as well say exactly the same thing. Why didn't we know this? Why didn't we know this? And it all comes back to having to find out by chance, usually a chance discovery, much later on, after we've been bleeding for, like you say, 20 years, before you have this awareness and this sort of, we can implement it, we can learn, and we can speak and share and all, all those things, and cycle chart and change the way we live and we work and all of that. But it all goes back to that comment of, why didn't we know this when we were younger, when we started bleeding? And, it's just so, it blows my mind to think, if children knew, like you say, if the education included the 4 seasons and the fact that you will change how you feel, and it not just being, that kind of psycho, spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical, and not just the blood needing to be managed, and how you might, how you would tend to that. It's I remember my school education, and I remember very little, actually, because it was very little. It was an hour, maybe, something like that. And I don't even remember really what happened. I just remember the imprint of it. I don't remember the actual session. I think I remember being allowed to sit on the table on the back row with my feet on a chair so I could see, and we were all gathered in a semicircle, and it was girls only, boys weren't there. I don't really remember much more than that, except for just the intense discomfort that we all felt. And they're like, oh my God, this is the most incredibly awkward, embarrassing, painful thing that I felt and everyone else could. And it was like we couldn't look at each other. And the teacher was sort of, I can't even remember who the teacher was actually, whether it was my own teacher or somebody else came in for it. But I would just remember them being really uncomfortable, just this whole energy of like shame, and it just stuck.
Yeah.
It stuck. And I know I'm not alone in that. That wasn't just me in my one school. That's really, really common, So I want to ask you, has it changed since then?
I think that feeling, I hear that so much from young girls now. So the first moon circle that I did the other day, we start with some quite open, broad questions, right, to kind of figure out like where everyone is at and what they know, and they all kind of came in. And what was really interesting is that the range of emotions they felt coming in, and this was probably a real naivety on my part, so it was a real interesting kind of reflection and learning curve for me. I just thought they'd all be excited because I was like, this is amazing, it's the best thing ever, I'm excited, so surely everyone's excited. But no. Some of them were really nervous, which I totally get because it was an unknown circle. Some of them, over half of them, like took some real encouragement from their parent to come. And of course, the moment that you're told that, you're like, well, of course, I remember feeling like that age 11. You almost need that sort of reminder to take yourself back. So I had a real range of emotions coming in. I've totally forgotten your question now, Charlotte, sorry.
Oh, that's totally okay. I was asking, from your experience or what you have seen, like has it
changed?
Yeah.
Okay, and I knew I was giving you some context that I felt was relevant, and then this is another thing that happens on day 1 and 2 as well. I just forget what I've been asked. So they came in and I asked them at the start, and they came in fairly breezy, and they were like, yeah, we've covered this in school, we've done a couple of lessons on it. We know what we're doing. And they came across as quite confident. When I dug a bit deeper and we started to explore the booklet and we started to look at the period products, it very quickly became apparent that they've had very, very basic education. So it is a quick whistle stop. This is what a period is. This is your very basic anatomy, in the reproductive anatomy. And really that, you might feel a bit emotional sometimes. And that was it. So the magic that happened when they got to explore the period products, and you'd said to me, like, this is the bit that they love so much and they get to have a play. And just watching them kind of, they thought that the panty liner was a sanitary towel. So being able to clarify that for them, showing them how to open it, and then showing them how to open a tampon, and then them getting to practice and to use those things. I've got some fabulous crochet vulvas, and they all got a chance to use them, and the moon cup as well. Like that, they wouldn't have known this. They weren't given that opportunity. And I get it, right? Like, this is no criticism of schools. I am a teacher, I'm an ex-teacher. I train teachers now. I'm a big, big teacher and school fan. And I know that when it comes to the RSE legislation that that the government gives them, which talks about what they have to do when it comes to period education, it's one paragraph that's like, prepare kids for a period. And then they're operating under real kind of budgetary and time and expertise constraints. Like, they do their absolute best, I'm sure, but there are so many conflicting curriculum priorities, let alone any of the other constraints that they're facing when it comes to delivering this. And I also think, you're constrained in school by the environment, right? Like, this education is going to take place in the classroom, whereas something like a first moon circle, bringing smaller groups of girls together, with parental involvement so that they can do this beauty. I mean, some of the most beautiful moments were watching the young person and their parent interact and do the craft activity together. Like it was so beautiful. And some of the feedback has been like, actually, you've paved the way, you've opened up those channels of communication for us and facilitated that. So we are actually having conversations about periods at home now in our family. And that's so transformative. And schools just, they haven't got the capacity to do something like that, to work in small groups of 6 and have 6 parents come in. Like it just isn't possible. And then the environment, that we set up and create for a first moon circle is so beautiful. And I don't know that can necessarily be replicated. So I see the two as quite different things. I see, you get your period education at school and that's great. But this is like a whole other additional layer. I realise I've still not answered your question. Sorry. Has it changed? I'm going to answer. I'm not going to be a politician. I think that the focus on period education, and I think that the conversation around period education has changed. I think that people are more open to talking about periods. I think the feelings that we experience, so feelings of like, it's a secret and it's a bit shameful and we can't talk about it, I do think they still exist, if I'm honest. And that's definitely what I found in the first moon circle when I asked the girls. There's definitely that feeling of like, we don't talk about this. Even though I think that's improved to how it used to be. So I just think there's so much more to be done to break down that kind of stigma and taboo that exists. And really interestingly, on one of my social media accounts, the thing that seems to really be resonating with people at the moment is when I do little reels of like things that I remember doing as a teenager. So there's a couple of ones where I remember like pulling back the sanitary towel in the school toilet and being really scared that someone would hear it. So I do it really slowly, bit by bit. And then there's another one where it's like if you come on your period in your lesson and, you kind of surreptitiously try to put a sanitary towel down the sleeve of your top and sort of sneak out to go and deal with it. And it's also secret. And these things seem to really be resonating with people. And people, so many comments from people who are like, oh my God, I remember doing that. Like that feeling of, it being something to hide.
Absolutely.
So yes and no.
Yeah. Thank you for that clarity, like that distinction as well about, there's changes in the way it's being approached, but sad to hear that the feeling that we're being left with, which is ultimately the memory or like the imprint,
right,
is still the same. That's it's hard to hear, isn't it? But I think also, it gives me a lot of hope that, we've come such a long way collectively, about being able to talk. There's a thing called a cycle coach now. There are these first moon circles and other things out there too. There's lots more, there's you doing your thing on TikTok. Like it's so good to see that we're making headway. And I think it's only, I hope it's just a matter of that ripple effect and that cultural change that will come, from these seeds, these pockets of activity that are changing the narrative. And I just think that, when it comes to these big systems like schools, the education department, things like that, it's probably going to be one of the last to fall, as it were. But I hope that, if there was anyone listening who was maybe a teacher or maybe even somebody in a department of education or, something like that listening, would you have any advice for them or just a tip or, just even an understanding that you have as being somebody who has been a teacher before and now a teacher trainer about, kind of reframing this instead of being something that is, like you said, like such a low priority. That teacher is probably coming with their own shame and awkwardness about having to do this and resistance to doing it. their own lack of training, if it's all it's saying is prepare for a period, like, oh my God, what does that mean? Like, why should they be taking this seriously, and recognizing the value of like honoring menarche and periods, and like, you know, it's not just a period, is it? Like, the potential is so much bigger, like the impact is so much bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a few things I'd say to that. It feels like there's two almost different questions there. Like, why is it important? And then what advice might I have? And I think the why it's important for me, I mean, I could speak to this for hours, but at the heart of it all for me is I just think that young people have a fundamental right to know and to understand what is happening in their bodies at the time of their first period, and to feel empowered and knowledgeable and positive about what is happening, because it's a rite of passage, right? Like, it's leaving childhood behind and entering adulthood, and it's something that deserves to be celebrated and acknowledged. But they also deserve and have the right to some really high quality education and experiences around that time as well. And you know, I listened to that fabulous lesson that you'd done as part of the training from Jane Hardwick-Collins, who's just amazing, about menstrual shame, and about, you know, when we set young people up in sort of that a shameful way with their period, it stays with them forever. And it can really have such an impact on their confidence, on how, you know, their self-esteem, how they perceive themselves, on relationships with others, on their sort of approach to their, you know, to their sex life, you know, as they get older. And some of these impacts, you know, are really far-reaching. And if we can actually reframe that and set this up as a really positive thing, I just think that could have such an impact on you know, their future. So that's at the heart of it for me. I just think there's a real right there to have really high quality education. And I think for teachers, and I mean, you know, I was just going to say, who am I to listen to on this? There's a little bit of inner critic there coming out on day two. My first tip would be language, being really mindful of the language that we use as responsible role model adults around young people. And sometimes it's very easy when talking about periods to slip into, like you say, you know, the experiences that teacher might have had of their own menarche, or any potential menstrual shame that they might be carrying. And so you might frame and talk about periods in a certain way that feels completely normal, right? It's totally ingrained, but actually is perpetuating and carrying on that stigma. So I think we've got a real opportunity to break that and to reframe that for young people. So I think if you're the one that's delivering, you know, the PSHE lesson, or, you know, whatever it is on period education, really planning carefully for the language that is going to be used, and scripting that and practicing it, and you know, and making sure that that's a really positive setup for young people. And the second thing I'd really encourage schools to do, and I know this is tricky because I know there's budgets, and, you know, obviously as a school, if you work with someone external, you know, you've got to inform parents, and, you know, it impacts wider stakeholders in the wider community, and people, they need to know that people are credible and all of that kind of stuff. But I really encourage schools to be open to working with people like me, you know, people who have done accredited courses in this area. I'm also a teacher, you know, by qualification as well. And I'm really keen to work with schools, and I'd go in and do things without charge. Like, I'm really passionate about this work being as inclusive and accessible as possible. And I'd absolutely love to go into schools and, you know, do a talk for parents, or do a slightly sort of modified first moon circle for some of the students. And I think that would be amazing. And so I encourage schools to be really open to that. And I think lots of schools are, because there are lots of programs and charities out there that you can outsource basically the kind of PSHE curriculum. So I'm sure lots of schools are doing that already. But yeah, they would be my two tips.
I love the way that you answered that and the tips that you shared and the way that you teased out, um, that question. Thank you so much. I love that, you know, I just love that so much. I think the first thing you said about language as well is just so easy to overlook and to dismiss as well, in terms of like its importance. And like you say, the way that the words that we have growing up that we learn to call our period is just, it's so derogatory, and it's like dripping with that shame and that disgust. Part of my process has been reclaiming it and using the word bleed, like my blood,
Yes. Yeah.
like, because it's blood. And instead of being like, oh, it's just got a sore tummy, tummy ache was what people, like my family would say, oh, have you got tummy ache? And it was because they didn't want to embarrass me. It wasn't because they were, it was from a place of love. And then at school it was, are you on your rags? Is it that Shark Week?
Yeah.
Whatever. There's all kinds of examples. And
we grew up, we're similar ages, aren't we? And I can so resonate with that. And I know we've had a previous conversation about swimming and doing loads of swimming when we were young teens, and the stress of like what to do. I remember, being stood with a tampon in the toilet of the swimming pool, not wanting to go out the door, and I'd be doing all these different positions and movements and like checking that the string wasn't becoming visible, and I'd have to like do 10 minutes of that before I could leave the toilet. And it's a tampon string, like it,
Same.
But it felt like it would be the end of the world if anyone saw it.
Yeah. I was absolutely terrified of a tampon string as well. Absolutely. And I actually remember I used to read this magazine, and I can't remember what it's called. It might have been J17 or Just 17 or whatever it was called. Or something like that. This was growing up in England, where you live and grow up too.
Yeah, there was a magazine. I thought you've unlocked another memory.
It used to have this agony aunts like page in there, and one of the stories once was about this girl who was doing swimming class, and she was sat cross-legged on the side of the pool like all of her schoolmates were, and the tampon string was hanging out of the bottom of her cosy, and the teacher said to her something about, now that's not a very ladylike position, is it? And gave her a kind of look, and this girl realized, and she was mortified, and she'd written into this magazine and they'd printed it, and I read it, and I still remember the story now, 25 years later. But at the time, as a swimmer, that killed me. I was like, oh my God, I hadn't even thought of that at the time. And then I suddenly went into a panic, and I eventually stopped swimming because the stress of it was so, we used to do really intensive swimming 3 times a week, every week. And I couldn't do that when I was bleeding. I was exhausted, let alone the shame, and having boobs all of a sudden and a body and feeling really self-conscious. Oh God, all these memories for me are coming back. It's a lot to go through, isn't it? Puberty and, just the very experience of it, let alone being witnessed and perceived and maybe even observed or talked about by anyone else, whether a peer or adult. Like it's so much. And I think we really forget that.
Yeah, 100%. We really do. And it seems to really resonate with people when you start talking about it, because everyone's got their own memories and their own things that they spent so much time and energy worrying about, that are all very personal and very unique to them, about their own period journey. Yeah. It's interesting. Going back to language though, really briefly, the RSE legislation, which is the government document that talks about relationship education, relationship and sexual education, and health education, has been updated relatively recently. Then that's where the menstruation passage sits. And the first line of it, which really bugs me, I don't really know why, is the onset of menstruation can be a confusing and alarming time if students are not prepared. And that's true, right? Like that's a statement of fact. If you don't know what's coming, that's going to be really scary. And I know that the about bloody time, the menstrual revolution book, the survey that they did found that 9% of young people didn't know what was happening when they started bleeding, which you imagine how terrifying that must be. And that's 9%. So if you extrapolate that into a typical UK classroom, and let's just presume it's half girls, half boys, so 15 of each, that's about up to 2 students in that class, in every single class across the UK, that will start their period and literally have no idea where they're bleeding from or why. And I just, I can't imagine that. But anyway, there's something about the language, like whoever wrote that from the Department of Education, someone chose to use 2 what I feel are really negative words and frame that in that way for all the teachers and PSHE leads reading that. Whereas I just feel like there was a real opportunity there to be like, menstruation is an important rite of passage, that, so good quality education and time spent acknowledging and celebrating this is essential. There's just another way of phrasing it. The words confusing and alarming didn't need to be in there.
Yeah, I really hear you on that, because I think that's a really interesting point, because like what you said, it is a statement of fact. And I think people need to understand that it does have a very negative consequence if it's not honored and acknowledged and supported and all of those things. But also, like you say, absolutely, it could have been this thing of like, this is an opportunity where we don't need to, if you're a teacher reading that, you're just going to go, oh yeah, confusing and alarmed, and take that on and feel it yourself when it comes to teaching that part, rather than this is a celebration, this is an opportunity to empower. And that, why do teachers go into this job? I'm sure it's wanting that connection, wanting to do that empowerment work, wanting to make a difference in these children's life. And if it's framed as that, this is a critical moment where you can have an incredible impact on children for not just their childhood and time at school, but their whole life. Like, I feel like teachers are going to be much more, I didn't realize, like, okay, yeah, let's do this. Like, I really hear what you're saying there. And I think that's such an important point that, at first when you said that, I thought, well, yeah, that's true. Like, what's wrong with that? And then when you explained it, I was like,
you can't argue with it.
Of course, you're so right. And it is the power of language. And we do need to reclaim loving words, beautiful words, honoring words. It's funny because I don't feel like bleed or blood is like an honoring or a beautiful thing, but I also think it's not hiding the fact of what it is. And other people might call it moon time or temple time, or, I don't know, the moon goddess is here, or whatever it might be. But I think that this is a really good opportunity for everyone to think about, the words that you do use to describe, to relate to your own body and your own period. And then, also how you're describing it. And if you have children, to think about how you can be inadvertently attaching, that kind of shame or that secrecy around it. And this is not in any way to point fingers and make you feel bad about yourself. It's just that opportunity of kind of going, like, how could I do this differently? I didn't even realize I was doing that. And
and that
beautiful,
that there's so much there to unpick in what you've just said, for sure, because I think the first moon circles and this work, where I said earlier it sits as like an additional layer to school period education, it also, like, I really believe that every single parent has the capacity to set this up and to educate their child. A lot of this education happens in the home, and a lot of the role modeling happens in the home. And I'm a big believer in parents know best. Parents know their child best and make the decision for them, absolutely. And I think everyone's got the capacity to have those conversations and to be really positive about it. But some people do find that really, really challenging. So yeah, I think that's an interesting point. And the other thing that came to my mind when you were talking about the positive setup is, one of the other challenges that I get is, well, it's all well and good if you have a regular period and there's no kind of physical like underlying conditions or anything like that, but you can do all the positive setup you like, but I then had a horrendous cycle and it was never regular, and really awful period pain, and it ended up being diagnosed with endometritis, but it took 20 years. That can be kind of like an example of the type of story that I can hear. And I really get that. So I think when we talk about this, it's really important to be like, we're not saying that by setting up everyone positively for their first period that everyone is then just going to go and have symptom-free periods and not ever experience any health conditions as a result. That's not what I'm saying. But by setting people up positively for it, because they obviously haven't started it yet, so you're setting people up positively, you're giving them the tools and the knowledge and the autonomy to cycle track, to get to know their cycle and what's typical for them, because we're all so unique. You're giving them a language to talk about any symptoms that they may end up going on to experience, and you're giving them a confidence. So if there was ever anything then, let's say 10 years down the line, that they needed investigating, they've then got the ability to walk into that GP's office, which we know is hard enough anyway with women's health issues. That's a whole other podcast.
Totally.
But to walk into that doctor's office armed with evidence, armed with knowledge, able to advocate for themselves. They've got their body literacy. They know what's going on and they know how to talk about it. So that is part of setting up somebody, positively. It's not to say they're never going to experience any issues with their cycle, but if they do, they are in a position of power where that can be dealt with. And I feel really, really passionately about that.
I agree with you so much on that. Completely. I think that's so powerful. Instead of it being this, it hurts and you just get on with it and you don't talk about it. That presumption even that it will hurt, or that presumption that it is, I think it's, and there's a whole, different healing cultures and different modalities, really have explored the emotional relationship to how we feel about our bodies and then how we actually experience our periods. And, so much of our emotions and our emotional attachment and beliefs about ourselves can come out in our periods and cause heavier periods or painful periods. So there's that element as well. Like if we're setting people up with a positive, open anticipation instead of dread, then what we're helping people to potentially avoid some of that. But obviously, like you say, there are all these conditions where they can manifest. They can, people can be living with these, like you say, endometriosis, adenomyosis, polycystic ovaries, for just to name 3, long term, which are extremely crippling and can be very painful and debilitating. But to be able to go like, oh, this isn't normal, actually, and yes, I'm sure, doctor, I'm not making it up. I've got the cycle tracking evidence. Totally. I think it just fills me with so much hope. And I think it's incredible that we could have this world of children who feel safe and comfortable and accepting in their bodies and in themselves at this hugely critical point in life, and they know their worth, and as they grow they take that ownership, that sovereignty in themselves, and are able to take good care of themselves and demand others take good care of themselves too. And the lasting impacts and then the inheritance of that to their children and out into the world, it's this ripple that I just feel like we are fairly close to the start of that. Like it's it's been started and we've picked up the baton and we're joining the kind of mission, but I feel like, this is the way that we are going. And I would just love to ask you, what's your vision for maybe school education, or maybe the wider world view? What's your vision? What do you hope to see?
So my vision is that, like, the menstrual taboo and the complete normalization of periods exists in society. And I think specifically what that might look like in schools is that we're running first moon circles, right? Like, that's, so the students are like looking forward to their period education when it comes. They've heard it's really cool.
Yeah.
And they're really excited about it. And then there is this just, not in a classroom setting like any other typical lesson, but there is somehow some kind of beautiful celebration event that takes place which educates and celebrates, and boys are included and a part of that, and have a really high quality education about puberty and changes for them, but also periods. I think is so important as well, that it's inclusive for all. And that it's just done with integrity and with positivity, and so those feelings of shame, like those memories that we've talked about today, the ripping off of the sanitary towel, the phrases that were heard in the playground to refer to someone being on their period, the secrecy that we feel that has to go hand in hand with having our period or starting our period at that school age. But people just don't feel like that. Like, it's just not a thing. It's totally normal. And one of the things that's is being discussed on my social media at the moment as well is like putting your hand up to have to leave the classroom to go to the toilet, and how difficult that can be for young people, where there's a policy about the toilet in school and not being able to use it in lessons, and so then you have to sort of share that you're on your period, and it's so stressful for young people, and just none of that being a thing. Like, people just feeling that they can be really open and feel really safe at school to discuss or not discuss. You don't have to talk about it all the time, but the periods are just a normal, accepted part of school life.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, Beth. Thank you for being with us. I've just loved.
That's my pleasure.
I just love chatting with you, and I really feel your passion and your fire. And you're the action that you're taking and the worlds that you're bridging. I just think it's, having you in that place of like having been in the school realm and still having your finger in the pie, as it were, through your influence over the teachers that you're training. And in your community with the First Moon work, and obviously online as well. Like, you're just doing incredible work and creating really important conversations. And I really celebrate you on holding your First Moon Circle. And I know that you're just going to be off from here.
Thank you.
So grateful.
I felt very.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, totally. I felt like I had to say something, because it's so awkward, like receiving nice information about yourself, isn't it? So I was like, talk back. But that I feel totally the same about you and all of the fabulous work that you do as well. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Beth. I've loved this. So where can people come and find you and join the conversation?
Yeah, so I am on TikTok, which I love. I love a bit of TikTok. And I'm at Beth Bloom and Belong. That's all one word. I'm on Instagram, Bloom and Belong. I think there might be an underscore in between the words. I've got a website, www.bloomandbelong.co.uk. And I have also got a Facebook page, which is Bloom and Belong. So I am all over social media.
On it. And I love that you're on TikTok, because I read a fact just before we close that some alarming percentage of children are getting their period education off TikTok.
Yeah, and I see that. I follow some accounts, and some of these accounts are set up by teens, 14s, and they're fabulous. They're great. They're really informative, really, really good accounts that are doing really well. I'll leave you, Charlotte, with a really quick little story about my 6-year-old last night, if that's okay, because I picked them up from school and she knew that I was about to bleed. And I said, I feel quite uncomfortable. My uterus feels heavy. I'm about to bleed. And so when my husband got home from work, I was lying on the sofa and she was rubbing my tummy. And he said, what's going on here? She looked up and said, Mummy's uterus is heavy because she's about to bleed. So I'm rubbing it for her. Which I just thought was so cute.
The power of being open. And including her.
It was a lovely
That's
moment.
Gorgeous. Love that so much. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Beth.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening in. If you're loving this podcast and you'd love to help me spread the wisdom shared, please leave a review or rating or share this with somebody who you think would love to listen in. I'm really passionate about creating ripples of change and getting this information to more women, girls, and people with a cycle so that they can reclaim their cyclic natures too. And if you'd love to dive in deeper with learning more about how to connect with your cycle and rites of passages, come and join our free Wild Flow Circle community or choose a course and learn with me on my online learning hub. All the links are in the show notes. And until next time, be well and go with the flow of your cyclic nature.